Hey guys, it is USS Wisconsin 94, and today I was going to be talking about a threaded post that a guy I know named FusionStar 287. This guy is probably one of the guys I know on the forums that I probably trust more than anything in game and in the forums. And he made a little thread, well, little I mean by a long ass thread, that basically talks about the thread about the balancing of tier 10. It says a serious, unbiased attempt at balancing tier 10 by FusionStar. Alright. Now, what he says is that he doesn't really care, he really doesn't know or care about the buffs or buff nerfs that PC has, so saying anything like, let's just change it to PCs, he's not really into that much. I disagree to a point, but overall, let's start it off. Very first tank of the tier 10 mediums is the M48 Patton. He says, starting off, let's look at this American tier 10 medium. This has always been a solid tank, but it became more and more irrelevant as power creep set in. Now, tanks like the Action 10 are better in almost every way than the Patton, and many mediums like the Soviets have always been stronger tanks overall. So, he suggested simply buffing the M48 Patton in one area, its gun. As the M48 has always been mostly a support medium, increasing its rate of fire to around 7.5 to 8 rounds per minute. And giving it a better gun handling would give it a very solid gun. I would give it a place at tier 10 again. Also, it might not be a bad idea to increase its top speed from 45 kilometers to 50 kilometers to further help the Patton be competitive against tanks like the Action 10. This is something, the M40, as you can see right here on the screen, from its stats, it's could be a solid tank. Unfortunately, this is one of those tanks that Wargaming many years ago nerfed, basically gave it a nerf bat really badly. Before this, from what I've heard on PC and before that, is it used to be super overpowered because its aim time and dispersion and other things is basically a laser beam. Point and shoot and he'll basically hit something. I prefer some of these buffs. I think a slight rate of fire buff would be nice. As you can see, the reload on here on console is 8.8. On PC, it's 8.4. But I think the best thing that would be for it is to follow Blitz. What they did on Blitz is they actually gave it armor on the thing. And I'll put somewhere either in the description or in this video, and I'll show you a picture of what it looks like. And it's on it. And it actually gave it a huge armor buff to the point where it is very strong. To the point that even some tier 10s even struggle against it, which is actually pretty entertaining. I'm going to take some screenshots and some pictures from the Blitz, and I'll upload it on here. Another thing that they did was that the big giant bubble on top of the thing, the giant tumor that everybody likes to call, this thing right here, that is now gone on Blitz. It has now been disappeared. And from what I've seen on Blitz, it has been doing so much better. It's basically a giant buff that they gave it, which is something that I think we should do on console as well. I think a couple of buffs to its dispersion would be nice, but I think the cupola and the actual armor change to its mantle and the front of the tank should be changed to be more like Blitz. Right on Blitz that they have is 177 on basically the entire front of the armor of it. The cupola has also been slashed, so it's basically like a fourth the size, so it's a lot harder to hit. The mantle and the front part of the hull of the turret have been upgraded to 177 millimeters of armor. So now if you were to go something like maybe a Russian T-62A or the 140, now I look at it and it basically a giant red spot around the top, giving it a huge buff in terms of its armor. I think that is something that they should really take a look at from Blitz. Some ideas from PC are good, but I just think that a pure gun buff wouldn't help it as much. I think an armor buff would help it a lot more. But there's also something I like to say about it. There is a thread by Joko3000 that said that he would completely change the American medium line. So basically, is that something that I would add in from what he said. The Pershing would be removed and it would be replaced with something with the M46 KR, the Korean patent that they have on PC. Bring that in, replace the Pershing, make it as a premium tank. The M46 patent would be dropped down to tier 8. Give it its... I think he said give it a 90mm. I can't remember off the top of my head. Give it the 90mm and give the final option an actual M47. The tier 9 would be the M40A1 without the M68 gun. Or actually make that it would have the M68 gun, but not as good as stats. And then the icing on the cake would be the M60 A3 or the A5, depending on which one people like. And that is basically a real super buffed patent. Unfortunately, I do not have any pictures of what it looks like. I'll find some on the internet and put it in the description to show you guys what I'm talking about. But it's basically a patent that actually has armor on it, which sounds really nice. So, next tank we're going to be looking at is probably, if it'll, yeah, it crashed again. Okay, give me a minute. Sorry about that. Come on. Here we go. Here we go. The next tank he was talking about is the Leopard 1. There we go. As we see is the Leopard 1, he says, this is a medium that is very fast and flexible, has great gun for sniping and lacks armor, making it a good sniper support medium. It's mostly fine as it is, but it could potentially use a buff to its rate of fire, which is only 6.9 rounds per minute, and or its top speed. I personally think that would be a good idea. Another thing that people have talked about, mostly Leopard 1 drivers, is saying that they should give it that extra bit of space armor on its mantle on a turret. They said it would give it another 100 millimeters or something like that. I don't know for certain. I can't remember, unfortunately. But I think a armor buff and a slight increase to its rate of fire from like maybe from 8.7 seconds to maybe 8.5. But I think where it is right now is okay minus the armor buff. And it still does pretty well. The next tank is the E50M. And he says this is a medium that he knows many people love, but honestly it's not very impressive. It has tough hull armor and a very accurate gun, but also suffers from having a weak turret, although a little smaller than the E50, a terrible rate of fire for a medium of 6.25, and pretty mediocre mobility as well. That said, it does certainly have its place, considering that it both has the best hull armor of any tier 10 medium, as well as being the best medium for ramming. But honestly, those are two novelties that don't do it all that much for it, especially when you consider that the E50 at tier 9 is pretty much just as good in almost every way. Once again, he thinks that this tank could use a rate of fire buff, even if it only is up to 6.7 to 7 rounds per minute. But that is basically all it could use. I personally don't agree with this. I think it's fine. I think it could use a little better mobility, but I also think that it also trades off the fact that it doesn't have the transmission in the front, like basically all German tanks do for some reason. As you can see in its model, I unfortunately don't have that many very pictures of it, unfortunately, but the very front is where the transmission would usually go. But then Wargaming decided to think it would be better to put it in the rear, which I agree with. I think that's the best thing that they did with it. But I don't agree with the rate of fire buff, as I think it would just make it too much, to be honest. I think where it is right now is good, as it generally has armor. I think that's its biggest quality about it. The next tank is going to be the Centurion Action 10, or the CAX. Quite a few people like to say, including myself. What he says on here is what can I say? This is a fantastic medium that has a great gun, a good top speed, and power to rate ratio. And has pretty decent turret armor. It's not too good, but it's not too far from bad. And it's fine, and it's basically fine the way it is. I personally agree with this. I think it's in a very good spot. I know there's quite a few people who still miss the old, I think they call it the cheese hat, the FV4202. I think they call it the cheese head, which I find pretty entertaining. But I think what Wargaming should have done is, I don't think they should have replaced the FV4202 with the Centurion Action 10. Instead, I think they should have made it as a second line right next to it from the Centurion 7.1. So you now have an option of, do you want faster FV4202 that does not have HESH as a premium round, and just a little slightly better turret, but a worse hull armor. As a hull armor on the FV4202 was incredibly trollish with just how well angled it was. But other than that, I think it's in a very good spot. But that's just me. The next tank is the next couple tanks is the Object 140 and the T62A. These two tanks I do consider to be overpowered. What he says is, no, I'm not going to argue which of these two mediums are better, even though he says that the 140 is better. But he will say that these two mediums are both incredible. Both are very mobile tanks with great guns and pretty good armor. While they are as close to being OP as tier 10 mediums could be, he says that they neither really need a nerf. I personally disagree with this 100%, because I personally cannot stand seeing these Russian mediums everywhere. They generally have great armor, great turrets. The T62A has better armor in its turret than the T62A, but I'd still say the 140 is more flexible. I think I messed it up. I said T62A twice, didn't I? The T62A has better turret armor than the Object 140. One thing that annoys me personally are the reloads. I've seen people get these reloads down into the lower 5 seconds, which is insane. I know people want to say how they have terrible damage of 320, as you can see right there, but I don't think that should be a factor in giving it such a high rate of fire. I personally think a rate of fire of around 7.6 second reload time for the 140 and the T62A would be a better choice. And a little worse dispersion from them both as well. But that's basically where I personally think of it. I do not like either of these tanks. I think they're both overpowered in terms of their mobility, more the 140 in its mobility than anything. Because I don't agree with either of these tanks. I can't stand them. The next tank is effectively, where is it? Is going to be the Object 430. This tank, what he says, is the third tier 10 Russian medium. However, is a bit different. it pretty much gets the worst of both other Russian EZMs, as it gets the worst gun depression of the T-62A with the worst turret armor of the 140. It also has more easier to hit weak spots than others. But as a positive, it does get better rate of fire, which is quickly negated by its worse gun handling. So you basically have a worse version of the other two mediums. But that said, it's still a perfectly capable medium. It might not hurt to give it better gun handling or even a better rate of fire to help it give a place among others, but regardless, it is still a solid medium nevertheless. I agree with that. I think the 430, its DPM is off the freaking charts. The highest DPM of all the tier 10 mediums, I think. I look at it, and it basically has the highest rate of fire of them all. Let's see. Yeah, it basically is over about 3,000 or more with its rate of fire, which is insane. It can basically take on a mouse and kill it in 10 shots. But its poor handling is its biggest downfall, along with its armor as being pretty terrible. Ironically, I look at the history of it between the 140 and the 430. The Russian military at the time, when they were comparing these two tanks, they actually chose the Object 430 over the 140, which is something I find to be very interesting, to say at the least. The next tank is the AMX-30B. And what he says, this French medium is currently just a slightly worse Leopard 1. As such, it could either use a buff to its rate of fire, its top speed, or to both, similar to his ideas for the Leopard 1, but are more needed here. Personally, I really don't care about this tank that much. It does not interest me at all. I do think it could use a buff because I rarely see this tank out in the battlefield, if at all, at tier 10. I don't really think it needs a buff to its speed, but I do think a rate of fire buff is needed. Maybe some better other gun stats. As from here, it looks okay, but unfortunately, it doesn't show the soft stats, so I unfortunately can't tell you about that. The next tank is the Bat-Chat. I'm not gonna pronounce its actual name. I'm just gonna call it the Bat-Chat 25T because I know I'll butcher it. Unfortunately, sorry, France. But what he says, while this is more of a tier 10 light tank, it's not like many light tanks that are underperforming. It has a strong autoloader, great camo, and is very fast and mobile. But thanks to its lower health and limited ammo capacity, it's fine as it really is. I don't agree with that at all. I hate seeing these things. Mainly for the fact that it gets a 5-round clip instead of, it's usually for 100 millimeters, like on the other French tanks. It's usually around 6, or an American, it's at 4 with a T-54E1 or the T-57 Heavy. I really do think they need to change this, because this thing can do over 1,900 damage. It can basically clip a lot of tanks without even trying, unfortunately. It can do 1,950 damage. It can basically clip itself or a lot of other medium tanks, and with just a slight high roll, it can even take out some other tier 10 mediums, clip basically all the tier 9 heavies and any tier 8, basically. I personally think with a change is to drop its clip size to 4, but also increase its loading time to match to the T-54E1's reload, which is basically 36 seconds. But to give it a little better edge, I'd bring it down to 3.35 seconds. Buff the aiming time to 2.5. And another thing that I bet will make Bat-Chat owners happy is you'll give it, instead of 30 rounds and 5 clip magazines, I will give it 4 rounds and 40 rounds to go with it. So it'll get 40 rounds in its tank. So you can basically get 4 rounds per mag and get 10 magazines for it. That's basically what I think of it as. I do think it basically is a tier 10 light tank, is what it is, basically. But I do think it is overpowered, and I do think this is something that they should change, but that is just my opinion. The next tank is going to be the STB-1. What he says, this medium is actually fairly similar to the M48 and the Action 10. Unlike the other two, however, this medium has a very high DPM at the cost of having pretty poor gun handling. Overall, it's a good medium, and it really doesn't need a change. I agree with that 100%. I think this tank is pretty terrifying to see, mainly for the rate of fire, but I also know that he's going to have a pretty tough time trying to come after me as well. But overall, I think the STB-1 is in a good spot, and I don't think it needs a nerf or a buff at all. The next tank is going to be the 121. What he says is, I really don't know much about this tank as it's rare to see one, but it seems pretty capable and has at least decent frontal armor, good speed mobility, and a high alpha gun for a medium, so I'd say it's fine as it is. I agree with it, but I do think that a gun depression of 3 degrees, as you can see, that is terrible. That is something I personally think that they need to change down to like 4 or 5, maybe 4.5, 5 degrees of gun depression. But I also know that there'll be quite a few people who are saying that's basically just another T62A, and I don't agree with that at all. I think it really could use a buff, mostly to its gun depression, but that's just me. Other than that, I think it's in a very good spot. Next up are the heavy tanks, and it's going to be, the first one on the list is the T57 heavy tank, the tier 10 American autoloader. And what he says, starting with the heavy tanks, is a tank that's not very heavy-like. Its armor isn't very good, although it can bounce rounds. It's not very quick or mobile, but it's still faster than many other heavies. And it gets an incredibly powerful autoloader. This gun makes the T57 Heavy incredible, as it can do 1600 damage in 6 seconds every 22 to 25 seconds. That said, it does has very low ammo capacity and it's pretty poor gun handling, but the Gorn coupled with the decent enough platform makes this tank OP. So, he simply suggests giving it a longer reload, perhaps in the 27 to 30 seconds, in order to keep its DPM further in line with other heavies. Otherwise, a speed nerf could work, but I think the nerf should be focused primarily on the gun. I do own this tank, and it is incredibly overpowered. I don't know if you guys saw my video on the T57 is not OP, T57 heavy, not OP at all video, where I basically did 7,000 damage in my 6th game. I agree 100% that this tank is overpowered. One thing I see that's interesting is how the armor on it is, it's so-and-so. It's not very reliable. The little ring around the gun, the dark orange spot, trying to zoom in, a little spot right there, right in the middle of the tank, going around the gun and behind the gun, that spot can be pretty trollish, but generally I don't really rely on it. I'm fairly certain that we're going to be getting the armor buff from PC, as generally people from console, unfortunately, will blindly follow PC all the time, which is something I don't agree with. I do think we should have some buffs and nerfs from PC on console, but I also think we should look at it and say, like, okay, they got some ideas which are pretty interesting ideas, but I really think we should be careful as to what we bring to console as well. Overall, I do agree that it needs a nerf to its reload, but I think it'd be at 27 seconds, especially compared to something like the AMX 50B, which I think has like 30 seconds. I don't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately, but I think it does need a nerf, and especially if it gets an armor buff like on PC, then I think it definitely should get a real nerf down to 27 seconds as well. The next tank is gonna be the T110E5, the Tier 10 American Heavy. This tank, what he says is the E5 has a decently mobile and quick heavy tank that has a mediocre gun and incredible frontal armor. While its gun is one of the worst guns at Tier 10, it's still a decent enough gun. And the armor makes this tank incredible. The entire front is nearly impossible to pin, excluding the lower plate and cupola. Even though the cupola is roughly 260 to 270 millimeters of effective armor, and the lower plate is 180 to 220 millimeters of armor, this means that the E5 can easily bully most lower tier tanks without even worrying about taking damage, and can bounce almost any round frontally while hiding the lower plate, and the lower plate is still capable of bouncing tier 10 shells as well. So, is the E5 OP? I'd say it's on the border. He would say it's on the border of being so, but it can still be taken down without much trouble if the enemy have enough pen, which plenties of 9s and 10s do, especially with premium ammo. That said, he feels like the E5 could use a minor nerf at least. That would make the lower plate weaker, roughly 150 millimeters of effective armor. That alone would give enemies a better chance against the E5 while still letting better E5 players use its armor effectively. I agree, and I do think it is overpowered. But the main problem with that is, before Wargaming gave it a buff, I still think it was probably one of the better, still pretty good Tier 10 Heavy. Although after the buff, I think this thing has basically, it's overpowered, to be honest. Mainly the cupola. I personally think the cupola is at 228 millimeters of armor. I personally think they should drop that down to 200 millimeters of armor. Generally, for the fact that I've even had APCR from my E4 in a video that I'll show you guys in the description. It bounced. APCR 375 millimeters of armor bounced off the E5, which is something I find incredibly retarded, and something I would desperately ask Wargaming to change and drop it down to 300, Jesus. Drop it down to 200 millimeters instead of having that where it is, which is 228 millimeters. The lower plate, I also agree that they should drop it down so it has basically around 140 millimeters of effective armor, or about 170, somewhere in there for the lower plate. That I agree with 100% as well. Other than that, I think those two things added and nerfed with this thing, I think that'd be the best thing about it. I think it'd make it a lot more balanced to me personally. The next tank is the E100. The E100, the German Tier 10 heavy tank. What he says is, to make this quick, the E100 has a ton of health, has the biggest gun on any Tier 10 heavy, has very strong armor when angled, and is still capable of reaching 27 to 30 kilometers per hour under its own power. This is countered by having low pen with standard ammo, having a few obvious weak points, and not having great armor when angling. And still being a big, slow tank, it's a capable heavy that is fine as it is. I agree with this to a point. I don't think Wargaming should try and balance a tank based on its pen. E100 is a perfect example because all people can do is just hit the triangle button or the 2 key on a computer or whatever and load up the heat round. So instead of having a crappy little 230 millimeters of pen, you now have a whopping 340 or 334 millimeters of pen with its heat round, which is something I personally think is incredibly dumb. I think a buff to its AP would fix probably the biggest problem in this with it is just how much people will spam heating it. A lot of people I know, unfortunately, will spam heat in this thing, generally because they know that if you're going against something like an E5 or something like that, and you try to shoot its cupola, you effectively have no chance of penning at all. So what they do is just push another button, and guess what? They now have 334 millimeters of a pen with heat rounds. Heat is still a terrible round to use, but when you can jump up almost over basically 100 millimeters of pen to get it, I think they should change it. I think they should buff the pen for the standard round to about 245 millimeters of pen. I think a buff to its AP would hopefully get a lot of players to spam less heat in it. I think that would be one of the best things about it. Other than that, the armor on it is still pretty trollish. Basically, I would say it does pretty fine. It does okay by itself. It still does really well against tanks and people and things like that. Other than that, I don't really think it needs to have that much of a change. The next tank is the mouse. And what he says, this heavy tank is one of the slowest, being capped at 20 kilometers per hour and has one of the worst guns in any tier 10 heavy. These massive negatives are opposed by the few positives. Those being the best all-around health in game, having... Wow, I fucked that up. Those being having the best all-around armor in the game, having the most health in the game, and having pretty much no weak spots when angled. Despite the mouse being one of his favorite tanks in the game, this tank really needs a buff of some sort. He feels that they should focus on the gun. One option is to get the mouse the same 150mm that is mounted on the E100, but he feels that change would take away from the E100. So that leaves the other option of buffing the gun the mouse already has. A buff to rate of fire of either 4.8 to 5 rounds a minute would make the mouse more capable of handling being rushed, along with simply letting it kill tanks quicker. And along with this, it could use to have better gun handling as well. These changes would give the mouse the ability to do more damage in game and allow it to be more than just a wall for people to see and shoot at. This is something that I personally think I really do think the mouse needs a speed buff from 20 is pathetic. I really do think it needs to have a speed buff of 25, of at least 25. I think the speed and the mobility make this thing absolutely horrible. And it's something I think that wargaming should change. But that is basically what I think of that part. And I'm looking at some of the other stats on here. It says it has a rate of fire of basically 4.03, which is terrible. Its reload is effectively a 0.1 second faster than the T-34s, which is pretty embarrassing. I really do think they should give this tank a reload of 13 seconds, which is basically a 4.61 or 4.62 rate of fire. That, with a little better aiming time and dispersion, I think it would make the tank a lot better. Same thing with making its traverse speed for both its hull and turret and buffing them up a little bit as well. Its turret rotation would be at 20 and its hull would be at 18, because I think this tank really could use a buff, and it's one of the unfortunate things about it. I personally would like to get this tank but there are unfortunately too many negatives to positives. But that is just me. The next tank is going to be the newest one of the newest tier 10 heavies in the game, and that is the Chieftain Mark 6. Basically, everybody knows this tank. This is what he says. This heavy has the best gun of any heavy, as it boasts solid pen, decent gun handling, and a great rate of fire. It also gets a good top speed of 42 kilometers per hour and a very good turret armor. However, these are counteracted by the Chieftain being sluggish, having obvious weak points, and only really having good armor when using its gun depression. So what you really have is a slow medium with a very good gun and situational armor. While he wouldn't call this tank underpowered, it could use a small buff, that being better ground resistance. Seriously, just make this tank able to accelerate faster and you have an E5 with a better gun and worse armor, putting it in line with the other heavies. I agree with this. I do think it needs a buff, but I also think that, unfortunately, you guys can't see it, is that the side armor below, on the side armor on the hull of the tank, is 50 millimeters right here, and underneath the space armor and the tracks is a whopping 38 millimeters of armor, which is absolute trash. I personally think they should buff it up to 41 millimeters, so then you actually have a chance of going against other tier 10 heavies, especially like E5s and T57s. I had a video when I was in my T57, and he angled, and a Chieftain angled slightly to his left, and I just pumped all 4 rounds of my 120 right into his side, and effectively killed him in very short time, unfortunately, due to the fact that he has such terrible side armor. I think that and a slightly buffed mobility, mostly to its ground resistance, would make it a much better tank. It'd be a better E5 in terms of its gun, but have worse armor. I agree with that. The next tank is the FV215B. What he says is similar to both the Chieftain and the E5. This heavy boasts a gun that is slightly worse than the Chieftain's, although with better gun handling, and is much better than the E5's gun. It also has a very strong armor with only a small weak point on the cupola. Wow. Decent upper plate armor with terrible lower plate armor, and just so speed for a heavy. However, this tank is also unique for one major reason, and that is the rear-mounted turn. This lets the FV215B side scrape fairly well and reverse around corners for quick snapshots, but also can make it clumsy when actually driving it in some situations. Overall, he'd say this heavy is balanced as it is, but it could use an increase to the amount of rounds it can carry, as 35 can limit how much of each ammo type you can carry. I do agree that this tank could use some more ammo. 35 is terrible in tier 10. I get something like my T34, which has 34 rounds at tier 8, and that's slightly more doable. But when you get into a tier 10 game, or when you're basically, it could use a couple buffs. One is the amount of ammo it can carry, as 35 is just too low. I think about 40 to 45 would be better. Maybe 42 would be better. But also, there's a lot of things that people don't seem to know, as the side armor on this thing is absolutely terrible. It is 50 millimeters on the entire spot, except for this one spot right here. Well, this spot right here is about 130, I think. I don't remember exactly. But it still is an overall fairly good tank. I'm also looking at Armor Inspector on my phone to see what it is, as I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh, no. I was off by a lot, actually, unfortunately. It's actually 101 at the top. Basically from right here all the way down from this spot and all the way down to the rear of the tank. But sadly, the lower part of the hull is terrible. It is 50 millimeters of armor, which means if you go against something, a tank that is 151 millimeters and up, it will overmatch it. Especially tanks like 152 on the BL-10, on the ISU 152, the Object 704, and the 268. There's also the T-30s and the E-4s and the E-3s gun of 155. Everything will overmatch it, and no amount of side scraping is going to help it at all. I do think they should give it a whopping 1 extra millimeter to both the turret armor on top of the roof and the side armor down on the hull, and buff it up to 1 millimeter more to 51 to make it more effective against tanks that are like that. But that's just me. Other than that, I think it's still in a fairly good spot. The next tank is the IS-7. The IS-7 what he says. The IS-7 has some very good positives going for it. Firstly, its frontal armor is roughly 300 millimeters or more everywhere but the lower plate, which is still a solid 220 to 230 millimeters. It has a great top speed of nearly 60, and its gun has pretty good alpha damage at 490 average. However, these good qualities are all negated by its negatives, as its pike nose at the front means that you can't afford to angle it against some enemies. Its top speed is nearly impossible to reach, and is usually it doesn't move faster than 30 to 35 except when going downhill. The gun has terrible handling and a very low rate of fire of 4.4 rounds a minute. Currently, this is one of the most underpowered Tier 10 heavies, and as such, it could use a few buffs. Firstly, its gun really needs to have a better rate of fire around 4.6 to 4.9, and should get better gun handling to bring it up at least somewhat up to par with other heavies. Secondly, it could really use having a better engine or ground resistance. Not so much that it could reach its top speed, but at least enough so it could travel around 40 kilometers per hour on flat ground without having too much effort. And finally, give it a few more hit points, around 2250 to 2400, as it currently has some of the lowest health of any Tier 10 heavy. I agree 100% that this tank really does need a buff, mainly to its gun. I don't think it needs a buff to its speed. I think I see them regularly getting around 35, 40 on flat ground. On kind of bumpy roads, it's about 30, 35, but I think could use a better ground resistance. The main thing about it is the fact unfortunately it has a pretty crappy gun. I think a rate of fire increase of its reload, a 13.7, and drop it down to 13 seconds instead. Another thing that I think they should do is something that I personally think what they should change for guns is that the 120s would be at 400 damage, the 122s would be at 420, the 128s on the Germans heavy tanks and tank destroyers would be at 480, would be at 480 damage average, and 130 on the IS-7 and the Wheezy 1111114 should be at 500. But that is just me personally, that is. But overall, I do think it could use a slight buff to its rate of fire, a little better aiming time, because 3.1 is just terrible. I think it should drop it down to about 2.8 with a little better dispersion as well. And maybe give it another 150 HP as well, and give it to 2300 HP. Other than that, I think that would put the IS-7 in a very good spot, and I agree that it should get a buff, but I don't think it should be able to reach its top speed unless it's going downhill, as he says. The next tank would be the IS-4. What he says, to make this one breathe, this heavy has very good all-around armor, making it very good at side scraping and still strong when simply angling. And has decent enough speed mobility, and it gets a worse version of the E5's gun. Currently, this tank is pretty well balanced, but there are just a couple changes he feels it could use. It should have the roof armor on the turret buffed. It already has a few weak spots, but the top of the turret is very easy to pin. You can pin it with basically anything at tier 9, 8, 9, 10s, and even some 7s. It should be given more ammo. 30 rounds is terrible for 440 damage and mediocre gun handling, but 38 to 45 rounds would be a fair amount. I personally agree with this. I do not have IS-4. I had the chance between buying this or the T57 Heavy, and I bought the 57 Heavy instead when Wargaming had the tier 10 sales, the price sale. I think the turret roof desperately needs that buff. I think that is something that holds this tank back. Probably one of the worst things about it from facing one and what I've seen of other people that have it. I do think the turret overmatch should be buffed. I think it's pretty stupid that this thing has the same exact weak spot of the IS-3. Another thing I think they should do is buff the gun depression. You go from something like the ST1, which has insane amount of armor that can do very well against everyone and everything with not much problems, but also has 8 degrees of gun depression, a much better turret, and basically the same hull. I do think it could use a buff to its gun depression, the overmatching on its roof of, I think it's like 30 millimeters. But I also think that giving it extra ammo would be good as well to help it. So I think about 42 rounds would be a good spot. The next tank is the AMX-50B. What he says, this tank is similar to the T-57 Heavy. It gets armor that can bounce rounds, but it can't be relied on, and it gets a similar autoloader, but with a longer delay between shots and longer loading for better gun handling. The biggest difference between the two is that the AMX-50B is extremely fast, capable at doing more than 60 kilometers per hour without many problems. So it plays more like a medium than a heavy. Pardon me. Overall, he would say this tank is fine as it is, with the only potential change being slightly better gun handling. So instead of having trollish armor like that T-57 Heavy, it basically is just a lot faster with the slower reloading gun with worse aiming time and other things like that. I do think that both the 50B and the T-57 are overpowered in their own way. The T-57, because its rate of fire is insane, so its DPM is over 3,000. You can basically clip any tank without any problems at all. While the 50B is basically T-57 on steroids in terms of its speed. I really don't think that should be a real big change, as its reload is 5 seconds slower, but yet they can still get it down to about 26, 27 seconds, which is still overpowered. I do think that both of these tanks are overpowered, and no, I do not think it should have an aiming time of 2.5. I think 3 is where it should be. I think that autoloaders should generally have terrible stats and to help balance them in the fact that they basically do a bunch of burst damage. But that is me, personally. The next tank, unfortunately, Armor Inspector does not have it for the console version, so we have to go for the PC stats instead. And you can tell the difference between PC and console is generally on the bottom left, if it'll let me do it. Nope, unfortunately I can't go that far. Damn it. Is on the very bottom right, you can see the live view off. That on the console it doesn't have it. On PC it does. I don't know what it's for. I don't remember, but it's basically just their way of telling you the difference. What he says, is you would hope that the newest heavy tank added to the console would be unique. But to be honestly, it's not really anything more than a worse E100. Its gun does less damage, a 600 average, for only a slightly higher rate of fire. Its armor is just as tough as a mouse in E100, but has two obvious cheeks that can be easily penned when angled, and has a cupola that can be penned by many 9s and 10s. And at top speed falls between the mouse and E100 at 25. So if you just want better armor than the mouse, if you just want better armor, the mouse is the better choice. If you want a powerful gun, the E100 is a better choice. As a Type 5 heavy falls between the two tanks and doesn't really do much better. So he suggests one simple buff, that is increasing its rate of fire to 3.8 to 4 rounds a minute. Unfortunately, these are the PC stats and not console stats, so I can't show you what the number is on console, so I apologize for that. But this is just we're going to have to do. This would give it the highest DPM of all three heavies, while leaving it on par with other heavies, and would give the tank a true identity between the mouse and E100 instead of just having a worse option than both. The next and final tank of the heavies is the 113. The only other Chinese tier 10, and of course he knows very little about it as well. From what he can tell, this is a decently mobile heavy with solid armor except the lower plate and a decent gun. It could use a buff to its gun depression for sure, but otherwise he don't know what to say about this tank. I do think this is one of the few tanks on console that should get a buff just like it did on PC. Mainly to its gun depression. Bring it down to 6 degrees of gun depression, and also buff its turn armor just like they did on PC as well. Those are basically the only two things I think that they could change to make this tank a little bit better. But that is just me personally. Okay, that is all the tier 10 heavies and all the tier 10 mediums. Now we get into the very controversial tanks in the game. The tank destroyers. The first tank is leading the TDs is the T110E4, which is probably the most balanced tier 10 tank destroyer. It's decent mobility, has a powerful gun, and has a semi-turret, but has mediocre, unreliable armor and a pretty poor DPM, so no changes are needed here. Okay, that one stung me a little bit because I own this. I own the T110E4 and I love this tank. I love it probably just as much and maybe a little more than the T30. I don't agree that its armor is unreliable, as I've bounced plenty of shots from all kinds of tanks and trolled them pretty hard, but then again, that's generally because I really know how to play this tank. Although some people are going to disagree or agree on that, but that's just my opinion on that. One thing I wish they would do is a couple things I wish they would do, at least to me, is give it a fully traversable turret instead of having the limit of 90 degrees either side. So basically giving it 180 degrees in total. Its DPM, in terms of a tier 10 TD, it has the worst DPM of all the tier 10 TDs. What the fact that it has a 19.5 second reload, compared to a lot of other tanks, except for the E3, which has 19 seconds, and the 268, which has an incredible reload of basically around 16 seconds, which is insane, in my opinion. But other than that, I think it's still in a very good spot. I would not change it, because I really don't feel like it needs to be nerfed. I know people are going to disagree with this. It's very controversial about its view range of being 400 and other things like that. And alpha and its view range are the main problem that people have with it. I don't agree with that, at least to the extent that people want to change it. The next tank is the T110E3. And what he says, this TD has the best frontal armor in the game, as it's nearly impenetrable everywhere except the lower plate and gets a better version of the EE4's gun. To balance this, the E3 has a terrible speed of 24 kilometers per hour and mobility of 24 degrees per second. Has awful armor everywhere but the side. Has a limited gun traverse, and before it was nerfed a few months ago, or basically 5-6 months ago, as this this thread was made like a month or two ago. I can't believe I didn't actually look at this a couple months ago. But before it was nerfed a few months ago, he would have said that this tank is easily overpowered. But since its reload nerf, this tank is pretty balanced as well. It's very strong in the right positions, but isn't too good overall. I do not agree with that at all. I do think they need to nerf that cupola on the E3. The E3's cupola is stupidly overpowered for the fact that I can go basically any tank and laugh in their face as they keep shooting rounds at it. Even with my E4 or even a Jaeger's heat round of 420, it's a damn pain. It's a real major pain in the ass trying to go after these things, as you only have a few spots besides the lower plate where you might have a chance to pin, and that's a very big if. I do think they should give it a bigger nerf, not to its reload or its damage, but to its armor and its speed. I think they should cut its speed and its whole traverse down to 20 to make it basically a slower, basically a faster, slower T95 and E4 is basically what I think they should do. Another thing I think they should do is nerf the ever-loving shit out of the commander's hatch. Because I look at it right now, an armor inspector, it has 340 millimeters of effective armor on the lower spot. As you can see right here on the bottom, 340 millimeters of effective armor, and the top is close to 370. The armor on it is 275 and 229 on the commander's hatch. So on the front is 275 on the front, right there, as you can see right here, and on the sides and in the rear, it's at 200. It's at 229. I personally think they need to drop this down to 200 millimeters of effective armor in order to make it a little more balanced, especially the front part, because the front is just insane. I personally think that a tank needs to have at least 3 or 4 weak spots, especially if a tank is relying on its front armor, so that people actually have a chance to go after and pen it from the front reliably if they have a good gun. But that's just my opinion. But other than that, I think the reload change that they did to it is a good idea to make it on. I personally think they should do this more with other tanks as well. If they have 2 tanks, they have exact same guns, except for one has a 2 or 3 second faster reload, I think they should change it so that it becomes more like half a second to a second. So basically like the E3s and E4's reload and stats, as you can see, is 19, 5, 2.9, and 3.6. 19 seconds, 2.5, and 3.6, and 0.37 for the E4. But that is my opinion. I think that is something that they should do with it. The next tank is the Jagdpanzer E100. The Jaeger is a very unique TD. It has the best all-around armor of any Tier 10 TD, as it's basically an E100 without a traversable turret, and has the second most powerful tank destroyer gun that can easily pen anything it sees for over 1,000 damage. The downsides to balances are that it's not very accurate, nor does it fire quickly, only firing every 23 to 25 seconds. It's on the slower end of TDs in both speed and mobility, and it does have a cupola weak spot on top of the tank. That all said, he feels that this TD is very well balanced, as it is tough to kill and packs a punch while still being limited by its slow speed and weak points. I personally don't really agree with that in terms of the cupola, because people say that it's a really easy target to hit. I don't agree with it. It's still pretty freaking small when you really look at it. Because you got the side of the tank, which is basically a freaking house, and then you get this, which is basically a door. Is basically what it is. It doesn't have very good armor, about 176 to about 200 effective armor in some spots, but it's still not very good. I agree that this is still a very well balanced tank destroyer, and I really don't think it really needs to have any changes. So I would say I agree with that in terms of that point. The next tank is the most controversial tank destroyer in the entire game, and that is the Waffentwigo off E100, or the Waffle. What he says is, I know at least some of you came straight to see what I had to say about the Waffle. Well, he thinks it should be replaced by the Grill 15, as he personally hates playing this tank. But as far as actually balancing it, should it stay in the game, well, that's very tricky to do. The gun is the only thing keeping this tank from being the worst tier 10, but at the same time, the gun makes it completely broken. So how would you change it? Well, he suggests having the autoloader, giving it 3 128mm shells in each clip, and 250mm shells in each clip, with also having the reload. This would make it incapable of easily charging down and killing any lone tank in the game, and still would leave it very easy to kill while it's reloading, but also keep its high DPM for an autoloader and still allow it to do a large amount of damage each clip. That being said, doing this would still make it a worse T57 Heavy or AMX 50B. So he'd also recommend buffing its speed at the same time, give it better resistance, and at 50 km per hour top speed instead of 40, so that it's faster than the T57, has better gun handling and pen than a 50B, but would still be a large, easy to pen target. I'm just gonna say it right now. Fuck the Waffle. Waffle can go die in a fire, and anyone who go plays it. Go fuck yourself. Seriously. Fuck you. I hate this thing. Honestly, yes, it needs to be replaced with the grill. And if they did bring the grill in the game, I think they would have to do two things actually to the grill 15 if they did. Is nerf its reload to evenly match more like the E3's and E4's reload. Maybe bring it to like 18.5 second reload instead of giving it like a 16-second reload, which they have it on PC, as well as nerfing its top speed to 45 so it can't keep up with other basically tier 10 mediums and even some light tanks. That I personally think is insane. Excuse me. Other than that, I think his other idea for this, no, I really don't see how you could balance this thing at all. No, I think a straight up removal would be good, but unfortunately, I don't think Wargaming is going to do that. So, not much we can do about that. The next tank is the AFV 215B183. Jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, let's talk about the Death Star. This TD has pretty decent speed and mobility. Has a semi-turret that can move 45 degrees in either direction. Has frontal armor that can bounce shots even if it isn't reliable. Has a 183mm gun that has best-in-class damage at 1150 average, but more importantly gets premium HESH that does 1750 damage each and 5 to 800, more like 4 to 900 in splash damage on non-penning hits. These great positives are only complemented by having a few small negatives. Those being the fact that it only carries 12 rounds, has a long reload with bad gun handling. So this should go without saying. The Death Star needs a nerf. To be honest, his biggest problem with this TD is the splash damage, which wouldn't be solved by reducing its pen. But then he realized that he could kill two birds with one stone. Keep the damage the same at 1500 damage 1500, 1750 damage average, but remove the premium HESH rounds. This would make the AP much more capable, but also reduce the amount of HESH being fired. But it would leave but it would let the Death Star keep the high splash damage in Alpha, when it could actually pen, which would be much less often at 92 millimeters a pen. This could also make this TD a more mobile but less armored alternative to the Jaegeru, and such would make this tank unique and balanced. Couple things. I don't agree with a few things. One is, no, it should not keep the 1750 damage, even if it did get rid of the premium HESH. I personally think it should have three things done to it. One, remove the premium HESH, because 275 millimeters of pen on a HESH round with 1750 damage. Are you fucking kidding me, Wargaming? Seriously? Fuck that. Nerf it, please. It needs to go. The next one would be its splash. I think it does need a splash, because I looked at it, I think it said it was like 4 or 5 meters of splash. I personally think they should drop it down to about 4 meters instead. And another thing you can see is the whole traverse. A 32? What? Why the hell should this thing be able to move like a freaking heavy? No. They need to nerf that down to like 24, 25 or something like that. I hate this thing so much. But I do think it should have the AP rounds and a basic HESH round of 92 millimeters. But I also think they should drop it down to 1450 damage for its HESH, while removing the premium HESH as well. That is something that I think that they should do. But I don't think HESH Star drivers are going to appreciate that much. The next tank is the FV 4005 Stage 2. This TD is currently a worse version of the Death Star, as it has the same gun speed and mobility with much worse armor. So, to balance this tank, he'd recommend simply removing the premium HESH rounds just like the Death Star, buffing its speed to 45 kilometers per hour, and either giving it a full turn or at least a much better semi-turn like the E4s. This would make this TD more flexible than the Death Star while keeping its worst survivability. Yeah, I think it should be. I think its gun should be nerfed with a premium HESH. I think premium HESH should be gone completely. As a lot of people, I keep telling people, I was like, oh, I think they should nerf it, because and basically just have an AP round and the basic HESH that no Death Star driver ever uses. But then I try to talk about if they were to have it and basically given 183 millimeters of pen, just like the caliber of the gun, people's like, oh no, that wouldn't work at all, because if you double the number, because if you're having like the other British tanks that have HESH, it would basically double the caliber of the gun, so it would have 366 millimeters of pen. No. Fuck off. No, it does not need that good. No. Sorry, but no. I do agree with removing the premium HESH. Buffing its speed of 45, I'm not really for that. 40, I'd say is okay. Given a full turn, okay, if you're going to give this thing a full turn, then I would ask for the E4 to have one as well. But that's just me personally. Other than that, yeah, this thing is, it's called the shit barn for a reason, because it's shit. The next tank is the Object 268. Moving on, you have this great all-around TD. It is a very good 152mm gun that fires faster than any 150mm and above at tier 10 of 3.64 rounds per minute. It's pretty quick at 48 kph, has good frontal armor with the exception of its still decent lower plate and weak cupola. On top of this, its only major downsides are having a slow reverse speed and having a terrible shell velocity, which means it has to lead targets by a substantial amount. Personally, he thinks his TD is fine as it is, But looking at objectively, it really does need a nerf. So this is the only case I'll say this. But he feels that the best nerf would be reducing its alpha damage to 750. He didn't say this for the E4 or the E3 because their longer reloads can give the enemy more time to work with, but by reducing alpha instead of the rate of fire in the 268's case, it would further separate from the others. I agree with this. I think this would be a good change to it because I don't think this thing should have 850, but also the fact that if people, I looked it up, and I don't remember exactly, but this thing could actually get a reload in 13 seconds, low 13s, which is insane for this thing. I personally think an alpha nerf to 750 for this tank is what they should do. I agree with that 100%. The next TD is the Object 263. This TD is a very fast tank, is a very fast TD with great frontal armor, only being worse than the Jaegeru and E3s. And a 130mm gun that's basically a better version of the Jagdtiger's 128mm or the IS-7's 130mm. Overall, this tank is actually a lot to the 268, with the 263 having slightly better speed mobility, better armor, although with larger weak points, and a gun based more so on rate of fire instead of alpha damage. Overall, he thinks the tank is fine as it is. I agree with that. I think the tank is fine where it is. I don't think it needs any kind of nerf or buff. I think it's in a very good spot, and I don't think it needs to be touched. Oh, wow. We are finally at the very last tank destroyer in the game, and basically getting close to the end of this video. I am at over an hour and 10 minutes. Holy fuck. Okay then. The final tank of this list is the AMX 50 Foch 155. And finally, we're on to the last tier 10. The Foch 155 is unique that it has a 155mm autoloader that does 2,310 average damage per clip. The TD also has a pretty good speed, mobility, and solid frontal armor with a few obvious weak spots. The downsides to this are its awful side, rear, and top armor, the 5-second delay between shots, having a terrible aiming time with very limited gun arc, and being oddly sluggish, especially when compared to the Foch before it. So, what does he think of this tank? He thinks it deserves to be nerfed, but the nerf it received was too extreme. So he proposes one simple buff, and that is to change its ground resistance to make it just as mobile, if not more mobile, as the Foch before. This would help the Foch 155 make use of its autoloader more often, and just make it more fun to play, and of course it would be balanced as well. I see this tank still as overpowered. I know people want to say, oh, it's all these other things, just as he said, make it nerfed and shit. I don't agree with that. It can do over 2,003 shots in this clip in like 10 seconds. So yeah, sorry. I still think this is overpowered. I don't think it needs any kind of buff. Although I think that a mobility buff in terms of its ground resistance could help it. So okay, I'm okay with that. And there you are. He feels that implanting these changes would help balance tier 10, make it more competitive, and overall make some irrelevant tier 10s relevant while making some yet very overplayed and overpowered tier 10s as well. Well, you get the point. Nonetheless, feel free to let him know what you think of these ideas. Throw some suggestions in there, and he'll be happy to discuss them. Also, for those of you wondering, I didn't include Artie because there's not really a question of balance for each Artie, but rather a question of balance for the mechanics of Artie. To briefly mention, though, Artie, I don't have a picture for this, so sorry about that. He feels the only tier 10 Artie that is completely overshadowed by the others is the GW E100. Either given it by gun mobility buffs or an interesting idea, actually give it the armor of the E100 or the Jaegeru. That could be bounce plenty of rounds while still having very low health. It would be very interesting in Artie with an actual armor. It would change this very overlooked Artie into one of the most unique in the game. Anyways, thanks for reading and happy tanking. Whew. Wow, I can't believe I got through that whole fucking list. It's an hour and 15 minutes. But I'm going to go down the thread and talk about some other ideas that people have. Just because I'm, bored and because, might as well. The first post is from DeathStalker206. And he says, I agree on most. The one that stands out to me are every rate of fire buff. I think you went too high with most of them. 8 rounds per minute on the patent would be far too much, saying that it has 3,120 DPM. Holy shit. He would say 7.2 tops of 2808 DPM. Then it wouldn't eclipse the STB1 and DPM and gun handling. Would buff the speed to 48 kph and try to get that cupola removed. I agree. Mouse, you would say, is 4.8 tops. 4.6 is where he think it should be, of 2,254 damage per minute. The E50, he wouldn't do much with a gun. Maybe 6.5 of 2535 DPM. You'd buff the ground resistance to make it on par with the E50s. The Leopard, he would say 7.2 for its rate of fire buff of 2808. He think 1.3 would be fine for the Type 5 Heavy. IS-7, he agrees that ground resistance and gun handling and a better rate of fire of 4.6 would make it better. He would not buff the 430 by any means. The 140 and T-62A should have either a minor gun handling or terrain resistance nerf coming from a guy with over 400 battles in the T-62A. Why do they have 15 to 16 horsepower per ton, but ground resistance that give them better acceleration than the T-54, the Tier 9 Russian medium, the T-54 with 20 plus? Fusion comes back and says, fair enough, his rate of fire buff estimates were just ballpark guesses, honestly. And that's why many were at such wide margins. Although that said, he doesn't think that 7.2 would be enough for the M48 patent. Tanks like the STB and the Action 10 still have the advantage of better turn armor without an obvious giant cupola, and both are faster as well. Given the M48 a rate of fire around 7.5 would work best, and still give it a better gun than AX or the STB while still leaving the platform with worse armor and power to rate ratios than the Action 10, and worse armor and a bigger profile than the STB1. Whew. Next up is Potato QQ. He says, tank destroyers, T110E4, reduced damage from 850 to 750, reduced view range from 400 to 390. Same for the E3, view range for the Jaegeru, Jagdpanzer E100. It also dropped that down to 390. And the Waffle, replace it with the grill. I don't agree with that. This is something that annoys the ever-living hell out of me, is why do people always keep saying it's always tank destroyers that have the problem in terms of view range? I don't agree with that. It's generally mediums that, all the other classes, if I'm in a light tank and I'm trying to spot, it is nearly impossible for me to go spot because I'm getting outspotted by all the other Tier 10 mediums. And some of the Tier 10 TDs are camping the back with binos. I personally think that all tanks, all tiers, all classes need to have a nerf to the view range of 380 meters instead. And also changing the camo and view range perks and equipments and things like that, perks and skills, so they give them less effective for other classes, while light tanks would have no change. That is that is what I personally think of that. There's a little bit more, but there's still more talk. There's still more posts in here. Deathstalker says, also think that the Batchat needs to have a clip nerf to 4 and reload buff to compensate. Damn YOLO autoloaders getting away with stuff because Greens can't shoot to save their teammates' life. I would agree with that 100%. Grab Yo Gats Foo says, I only read a few suggestions, but the E50M doesn't need a buff. Okay. FusionStar, in reply to Potato QQ, is the E3 and E4 don't need damage reductions. As for view range, well, to be honest, I don't really care. View range is already an overrated stat anyway, and except for tanks that have absolutely terrible view range, like many Russian tanks, it's never bothered him. I agree, view range is an overrated stat, but I still think they should change it, like I just said earlier. And his next post is reply to Grab Yo Gats. Basically, I'm just going to call him Gats. He hasn't played the tank personally, but why not? It's pretty much identical to the E50, but with better pen and better traverse speeds, and has one of the lowest DPMs of any tier 10 medium. I don't think a rate of fire buff is too far out of place. Potato QQ, in reply to Fusion's post, is the big majority of the problem with tier 10s in general is the high alpha damage and view range of TDs. I don't agree with that again. Reducing the damage so TDs aren't so OP in view range so that light tanks get more threshold to work with. Again, I don't agree with that. As I just explained, it's generally mediums I am more annoyed with. He posted this in this other thread in no response, so maybe someone can clear it up. Light tanks should be able to out view range TDs, but the max range is 445. The only problem he sees is if Wargaming did something to reduce the view range on TDs and give them better camo. No! No. Do not give them better camo. Alright, I did a test with Turbo Clicker with my E4 and my T49 trying to spot his 268. And he put a shit ton of camo parts on us, and I could not spot him until I got to the proximity spotting of 50 meters. And hell, it wasn't even a 50 meters. I had to get at 48 to actually spot him, which was insane. I don't agree that. No, I think they should give him worse camo, to be honest. They can put both view range and radio signal range perks in all the 4 camos and still do the same thing. That's not excluding the fact that they can still equip optics or telescopes and consumables with buzz and arm perk. Should TDs have an equipment restriction to only telescopes and only optics? They need to play their class properly. He spelled there wrong. THERE. That's wrong. Okay. THER. Wow. THEIR. That's the right there. Anyway. Either mid-range support like Death Star or long-range support like Waffle. Fuck no. The next post is from Lord Killer DNA. Yes, please buff my GWE100. It slows balls. And the gun is hardly on par with an M5355, aka the skill cannon. It does need an armor buff. 60mm is a joke, or at least a better gun than 5355s. Right now, only shining quality of the GWE100 is it can't be trolled by flame tanks because it's so big and lunky. Lol. What? That makes no sense. Okay, no, don't agree with that. Scarupio says in this post, the 121 needs the PC gun oppression boost. At least the 113 could work with just the DPM boost off PC, so as a DPM of it like the E5. E50 would only benefit from a small turret armor buff, very small. You don't want to give it a gun that good. Too much DPM, lest you end up with another T62A problem. Okay. Potato QQ post reply to Scorpio is, What's the gun depression now? And he puts a little thing from copied from tanks.gg. Is elevation and depression. Elevation is 15. Gun depression is 3. Fusion Deathstalker replying to Fusion is also far slower than the E50M. Not a very good tank in his opinion. It's a slower E50 with worse matchmaking, better traverses, and APCR standard. Scorpio replying to Potato QQ. It's technically 3.5 on PC and 3 here. Edit. He personally would like to see 4, but according to some people, it would magically be able to compete with a T62A if it got 4. Personally, he doesn't agree with that at all. The final post of this thread, oh thank God, is from Matt Britt Force. And he says, what exactly does GW E100 have an E100 series hull, but have lackluster armor, whereas all other E100 series tanks have a good armorlet using the same chassis? It does not seem to make much sense, at least to him. At the very least, the bottom tank of the tank should have some form of armor like the other E100 series tank. That way, it could have a weak top part like the Waffle E100, but a good, strong bottom part of the tank. I really don't see that to be a very good thing to give Artie, any kind of Artie, some kind of... I don't think any kind of Artie should basically have some kind of armor. As a Conqueror satellite gun carrier already shows, you can bounce out the freaking front of the hull because it's on the FV215B hull. Oh, wow. Well, I finally have gotten done with this. Nearly an hour and a half later, I've gotten done with this whole damn thing. Oh my God, I should have done this fucking months ago. Anyway. Jesus. Talking too much. Well, okay, you guys just... If anyone actually managed to follow this the entire way and listen to me talk for an hour and a half, I honestly do not know what to say to you. Other than that you're insane. I don't know, why would you listen to me babble for an hour and a half, but okay. It's an hour and a half. I've got to get this rendered and uploaded tomorrow on Saturday, the 17th, hopefully. But, that's basically going to be all of it for now. So, this is USS Wisconsin 94, and I will see you guys later.